Hilchos Tumas Meis Perek Chamishi, the laws of corpse impurity, chapter 5. We're changing gears today. Until now, we've been talking about the corpse itself. Which entities of the corpse transmit the highest level of impurity, which entities of the corpse transmit a lesser level of impurity, but the focus was all on the source of impurity. Today, we're moving to the other side, the entities that are contracting impurity from the corpse. The Rambam divides this into two categories generally, Adam and Kalim, human beings and utensils. And we're going to talk about what happens if a human touches a corpse, what happens if utensils touch a corpse, and also what happens if varying degrees of distance from the corpse. A human touches a human who touches a corpse. Utensils touch a human who touches a corpse. Human touches utensils, utensils to utensils, etc., etc. How the further you get from the corpse, the lesser the impurity that you contract gets. And this discussion is actually going to open a window into a much wider discussion that relates to all of impurity, where this idea comes into play. How the further you get from the source of impurity, the less strong that entity gets in terms of its impurity. So that's the journey that we're starting today. So in a way, this is a very fundamental chapter. It's going to be relevant to many, many principles across the entire book related to ritual impurity. So it's a good day to focus, a good day to be tuned in to the Rambam. Halacha Aleph, the Rambam begins. And again, first the conversation is going to be localized, relating to a corpse. Kol hamistamin machmas hameis. Any entity that becomes impure directly from the corpse, bein adam, bein kelim, whether we're talking about a human or a utensil, and we'll soon define what utensils mean. But typically, as a theme, according to the Rambam, we're talking about all utensils, metal utensils, wooden utensils, bone utensils, glass utensils, all kinds of kelim. Clothing is also under the rubric of kelim. The point is, if something comes into direct contact with a dead body, tmeim tumas shiva. They are impure with the higher level of impurity of 7 days. When it comes to a corpse, there are two levels of impurity, as we began to speak about in chapter 1. There's a 7-day severe impurity, and then there's the 1-day lesser impurity. So the Rambam is saying, when you become tamei directly from the corpse, you get a tuma of 7 days. Ketzat. Says the Rambam, what does this mean? Adam oikli, a human or a utensil, shenaga bidvarim shemitamin min hameis b'maga, that touched those entities of a corpse that transmit impurity through touch. Or they contracted impurity through the tent, in one of the ways that tent makes you impure, which actually has 3 variations. You formed the tent over the corpse formed the tent over you and the corpse were under the same roof. The point is, you came into what's called oyel. Or a person carries those entities of a corpse that transmit impurity through carrying. He uses the word person because utensils don't have the ability to carry things. So in this case, it's only the person. But in general, when it comes to oil or it comes to maga, it could include both a person and utensils. Hakol tmeim tumas shiva. All of these entities are going to become impure for 7 days. Shenemar, it's clear in the Torah. The Rambam picks the verse from oil, but the same thing is true of maga. It says in the verse, Kol haboel ha'oil v'chol asher ba'oil. Anybody that comes into a tent, that's referring to the person. Anything that's in the tent, that refers to the kelim, the utensils, yitma shivas yamim, becomes impure for 7 days. So on this chart, red is going to represent impure for 7 days. There's a reason why the kelim are highlighted in an even deeper red, that we'll see in a moment. But for now, let's just assume red means 7-day impurity. So you have the corpse itself, it's the primary source of everything. Both a person and the utensils that will touch it become red, become impure for 7 days. Now, there's a special rule with regards to the human being. And that is that any time a human being is impure for 7 days, that 7-day impurity will extend to any utensil that he comes into contact with. Special decree of the Torah, as the Rambam expounds right now. Adam shenitma b'meis, a human being, halacha beis, a human being becomes impure from a dead body. V'kelim sheyiga bahen adam zeh, and all utensils which this person might touch, tmein tumas shiva, are also impure for the full 7 days. Shenemar, this is learned from the verse which says, Moshe Rabbeinu was talking to some Jewish people who had come into contact with the dead. During the war of Midian, that's where many of the laws of the dead impurity come from. Moshe Rabbeinu told them, V'chibastem bigdeichem bayem hashvi utahartem. After you count 7 days of impurity, you also, not only do you have to immerse in the mikveh, but you also have to wash your clothing in the mikveh, and then you become pure. Meaning that besides for the human being being impure, also the clothing, which is another name for kelim, for all utensils that they may have touched, become impure. So that's a special rule for the second degree utensils. We're calling the person the first degree, We're calling the kelim the second degree, even though it's not fully proper. I should really call the adam the highest degree, the primary degree, and kelim will be the first degree, because in other contexts, the Meis, we're going to see later on in the chapter, the corpse is the highest of the high. It's called like the grandfather of impurity. The person here will be called the father of impurity, and kelim will be called the first degree. I'm calling it second degree only in the context of its removal from the corpse. It's second in place from the corpse. Kelim get 7-day impurity. But if we're talking about another person, says the Rambam, aval adam shenaga ba'adam shenitba b'meis. But if a person touches a person who became impure through a corpse, it doesn't matter at what point he touched the person, bein shenaga ba'achar shepeidash mimatamav, whether Mr. B touched Mr. A after Mr. A had separated from the corpse. So Mr. A was at a funeral, he touched the corpse, he comes home, he gives Mr. B a hug. That's touching la'achar shepeidash mimatamav, after having removed from the source of impurity. Bein shenaga ba'keshuhu adayin negea b'meis, whether he touched Mr. A as he was in the middle of touching the corpse. Harezeh hasheni tamei tumas erev. Since you're second degree removed, you're only impure for 1 day. Shenemar, because it says in the verse, V'hanefesh hanegas, when a person touches, titma ad ha'arev, it only becomes impure till the evening. Since in another verse it says that a person that touches is tummy for 7 days. And here it says that if a soul touches, it's tummy for only 1 evening. We learn that this verse is talking about second degree. A person who touches a person who touched the corpse. It's actually hinted in the beginning of the verse as well. It's talking about a person who's already impure and he's touching something else, i.e. he's touching a second person. Touching a second person, the second person is only tamei. This is the orange in this hierarchy, only tamei for 1 day. It says the Rambam parenthetically, Zehu din Torah. This idea that the second person is always impure for 1 day is only true biblically. Aval midivrei seifrim, but rabbinically. Hanegeya b'meis. If Mr. A is touching the corpse, v'naga ba'adam acher va'adayin hu mechuber b'meis, and Mr. A touches Mr. B while still touching the corpse, it becomes like an electricity current. Shnei tmein tumas shiva. They both become impure for 7 days. So ki'ilu naga zeh hasheni b'meis atzmai, as though the second person directly touched the corpse. But that's a rabbinic imposition. By biblical law, once you're 2 degrees removed, you are only tamei for 1 day. The rabbis came and said, if you touch the guy while he's still touching the dead body, you become tamei for 7 days. And even that, says the Rambam, Bamed Dvarim Amurim, when did they impose this decree? Le'inyan truma v'kadashim, only with regards to not eating truma, which is the Kohen's special meal that he can only eat if he's pure, not when he's impure, and eating sacrificial meat, which can also only be done while pure, not while impure. So the rabbis would say that in this case, if you touch the first guy while he was touching the dead body, you can't eat truma or kadashim for the full 7 days. Aval nazirullah is a pesach, but with regards to a Nazirite who has to destroy his term, his count, if he becomes impure from a corpse, or a person who's making the Passover sacrifice, you cannot do it if you're impure. The rabbis didn't impose a decree in that area. Bein b'shas chibur, bein achar shepeidash, whether he touched Mr. A while he was touching the corpse, or after, einei tamei ela tumas erev, kedin Torah, we only impose the 1 day impurity like the biblical law, and that's the amount that he's impure, not fully impure for 7 days. Therefore, let's say if Passover came out to be later on in those 7 days, he would have to bring a Passover sacrifice because he's already considered fully pure. That's as far as people. Just to summarize and to review, the person who himself contacts the corpse is tamei for 7 days. The clothing or the utensils that he touches also becomes tamei for 7 days by extension, special decree in the Torah. But if it's the person who touches the person, he only becomes tamei for 1 day. Halacha Gimel, now let's move across the aisle to the kelim. So the first thing you have to know, says the Rambam, is kelim shenitmu b'meis. We have a very special law. When utensils touch a corpse, and here we're going to see why it's a deeper red. Kelim touch a corpse, bein b'maga, bein b'oyel, whether through contact or through the tent. And again, they don't have the idea of masa because they cannot carry, they're not conscious beings. So we have only touching or the tent. Point is, if they become impure from a corpse, harehein la negea b'hen can negea b'meis atzmai. Anybody who comes into contact with them may as well be coming into contact with the corpse. Torah equates, as we're going to see in a moment, Torah equates utensils that touch a corpse to the corpse itself. So the same way, please follow this carefully, the same way when you're dealing with the corpse, we have 1 degree where both become tamei for 7 days. And then another degree from the person where they become tamei for 7 days. The same thing will apply in the miniature with the kelim itself. It'll go down 1 degree. Both Adam and Kelim will become tamei for 7 days, and if Adam touches Kelim, the Kelim will also become tamei for 7 days, as the Rambam proceeds to expound in a moment, but first he gives us the source. Ma meis metame hanegea bai. Just like a corpse will transmit impurity to he who touches it. Bein adam, bein kelim, whether it's humans or utensils, tumas shiva. A tumah for 7 days, right? The corpse here, adam and kelim both get 7 days. Af kelim shenitmu b'meis. So too the utensils that came impure from the corpse, heim v'hakelim ha'adam sheyiga bahen, them and the utensils or the person that touches them, tmei and tumas shiva, will become impure for 7 days. What is the source for this in the Torah? Where do we see that the utensils are equated with the corpse? So the Rambam says, shenemar, it says in the verse, Torah describes the laws of corpse impurity. The beginning of the verse says, v'chila shel yigal pnei hasada, anybody that touches anything on the open field. And Torah lists the following words, b'chalal cherev oy v'meis. If somebody touches, and literal translation is, if somebody touches a corpse killed by the sword, or a corpse that died naturally. Chalal cherev, chalal means a corpse killed by the sword, or a regular dead body. Says the Rambam, why is the Torah making the difference? The point is a dead body. Who cares how it died? By using these words, mipi ashmu alamdu, we learn from tradition, shehacherev kames, that cherev, since Torah specifically states the word sword, right next to the word meis, that means that the sword is like the mace. And even though Torah says the word sword, v'hu adin l'shar kelim, the same is true of all utensils. And not just all utensils that are like a sword, in that they are metal. The Rambam has a novel approach that says, bein klei matches, whether it's metal utensils, bein klei shetef, whether it's shetef utensils. Shetef means immersible. Utensils that can be immersed in a mikvah and become purified. That refers to bone, it refers to glass, that refers to wood. It excludes pottery, as we're going to see. But the point is, it's not only metal. Also klei shetef, ubegadim, and clothing as well. Many, many other Torah authorities are of the opinion that it only applies to metal. But the Rambam says it applies to all utensils. And by the way, the Rebbe once pointed out, based on one of the earlier commentaries, that this explains the Rambam's choice of derivation from the verse. What did the Rambam say? It says, B'chalal cherev oivemes, cherev kames. The sword is like the dead body. Elsewhere in the Talmud, the Talmud learns this just from these two words. B'chalal cherev, corpse of a sword. And the wording in the Talmud is, cherev harehu kechalal. The sword is just like the corpse. When you learn it from B'chalal cherev, cherev harehu kechalal, that implies only metal utensils. Why? Because cherev means a type of utensil which could make a chalal, which could make a corpse. Typically, it's metal implements that you kill with. You don't kill with other types of weaponry. But when you say cherev kames, you're not dealing with chalal. Chalal means a murdered person. You're dealing with a dead person, and you're just comparing utensils to dead people. That can include any utensils, even the other types of klishetef and clothing. The Rambam proceeds to give what seems to be another source. And we're going to see here also how the Rambam is very precise, bringing out another element of his unique approach to this concept. Harehu Aimer, says the Rambam, consider the verse. It says in the verse that, again, the same portion after the war with Midian, Moshe Rabbeinu said, Koil hoireg nefesh, v'choil negea b'chalo. Anybody who killed a soul, and anybody who touched a corpse, needs to stay out of the camp for 7 days because they're impure from corpse impurity till they're going to be sprinkled with the ashes of the red heifer, etc., etc. But what does it say here? You become impure if you killed a soul. Says the Rambam, can that really be? Is the act of killing what makes you impure? Would you even consider to say that here you have a person who shot an arrow and it killed somebody, or he threw a stone and it killed somebody, that he's going to be impure for 7 days? That's ridiculous. There's no contact at all. And just the killing? How could the killing make you impure? Ella, clearly, the Torah means to say, hoireg nefesh b'cherev v'chayetzeba. We're talking about somebody who killed a soul in close combat, through a sword. Shenitma, and therefore he became impure, binigi aseh bakli shaharagba, by touching the utensil which he used to kill, even if he didn't touch the corpse. By touching the utensil, shaharei naga hakli bames, which the utensil touched the dead body. And because the utensil touched the dead body, and that's enough to make you impure, from here we learn that touching kelim is just like touching the corpse. This is a second source for this concept. The Rebbe once spent a bunch of time comparing the Rambam's language to Rashi's language. Rashi also mentions this concept on the verse in Parshas Matos. He comments, Kol Herdeg Nefesh, but Rashi says it a little differently. Listen to how Rashi says it. He says, Yochel, one might think, by reading the words kol hereg nefesh, one might think, afilu zarak b'chetz v'hargai, even if a person shot an arrow into him and killed him, he would also become impure. Talmud loymar, therefore, the verse continues and says, v'chol negea b'chalo, anybody that touched the corpse. And by this juxtaposition, we learn, ma negea al yedei chiburai, av hereg al yedei chiburai. Just the same way a person touches a corpse, becomes impure through contact that he has with the corpse, so too, when a person kills somebody, it has to be killing in a way where there's contact, at least through the utensil. If you pay attention to the words, we see three major changes between the Rambam's expression and Rashi's expression. When Rambam introduces the din, he says, V'chisala al daitcha, can it even arise on your mind, as if the very assumption is ludicrous. Rashi says, Yachel. Yachel means you actually could think. You could think that just shooting an arrow would make you impure, had you not had the juxtaposition. Rambam says, even without the hekesh, it's a ridiculous proposal. Also, the Rambam adds two examples. He says shooting an arrow and throwing a stone. Rashi only chooses the example of shooting an arrow. Thirdly, the Rambam just mentions the killer. Yara chetz v'harag. He shot an arrow and he killed. Rashi says v'har goy, and he killed him. He also makes sure to mention the person that died. These are very significant differences. And the Rebbe says this gets to the heart of a big machlekas, a major argument which Rashi and the Rambam have, as to whether direct contact with the corpse and then touching something else is a biblical concept or a rabbinic concept, what's called Tuma b'chiburin. Tuma through the electric current that I mentioned before. The Rambam said clearly that the Tuma b'chiburin concept is a rabbinic imposition. Biblically, it doesn't matter if you're touching, if you're not touching anymore, you're second degree removed, you're second degree impurity. Rabbinically, yes. Rashi is of the opinion that Tuma b'chiburin is actually a biblical concept. And therefore, since Tuma b'chiburin is a biblical concept, that electric current, so to speak, can pass from the corpse even to the second degree removed, maybe, says Rashi, we can apply that even further. Even if there's no physical contact, if my power, my energy, touched the corpse by throwing, shooting an arrow, perhaps the concept of Tuma b'chiburin extends to that touch. Through my throw, through my shot of the arrow, I've become connected with the corpse. That's the Yachel. One actually might think so. Since Tuma b'chiburin is min ha'Torah, Yachel, one might be led to think, halachically, that the energy connection links the corpse and the person who shot the arrow, and therefore makes him tameh. That's why Rashi mentions that he threw the arrow at him, and he killed him, making the connection between the person that killed and the corpse. That's why Rashi also chooses only the example of the arrow, because an arrow is something which is mekabel tumah, it's susceptible to impurity, and therefore by shooting an arrow, one could establish a link between the corpse and the shooter. But the Rambam holds that Tuma b'chiburin is not biblical. It's only rabbinic. So there's no way to even imagine, if the whole idea of contact through a corpse, the electric current, is rabbinic, certainly there's no way to imagine that it could exist by virtue of shooting an arrow. And therefore the Rambam says, V'chisal al daitcha, could you even think about such a thing? You can't even propose it. He also only talks about the killer, because the corpse is not even in the discussion. That's for sure that there's no link. The proposal would be that the person becomes impure just by killing. And that also is negated. And therefore the Rambam also adds the example of a stone, because a stone is not mekabel tumah, it's not even susceptible to become impure. By that the Rambam stresses that we're not talking about even entertaining a link between the corpse and the killer. That's for sure out of the question. We're just talking about that perhaps the killing should establish a level of impurity, and that's what we're negating based on this verse. Wonderful sikha that the Rebbe has in volume 28 of Likutei Sichos. But the point is, you see how the Rambam, every verse that he quotes, helps you, and the way he quotes it, helps you understand deeper elements of his opinion. At any rate, what do we have? We've established this special power of kelim. Kelim touching a mace become as powerful as the corpse itself. Now, all we've said in terms of the power of the kelim is that kelim can transmit 7-day impurity both to Adam and to kelim. What about this next level? The fact that an Adam who's tameh for 7 days makes the kelim that he touches for 7 days. Does it apply here too? Says the Rambam, it does. Uminayin, how do I know? Sha'af hakelim hanoigin ba'adam shenoga bekelim shenitmu b'meis. You got to read the whole string Let's go step by step. That also utensils that touch a person, that touched utensils that became impure from a corpse, shetmeim tumas shiva, that they too are impure for 7 days. You told me before when it came to the person directly contacting the corpse that his kelim become tamei for 7 days. What about in this scenario? Since the person touching the kelim may as well have touched the corpse, the same law applies to the kelim that he then touches. We return to the same verse because it says, you will wash your clothing on the 7th day and you will become pure. From here you learn the ironclad rule should call that any scenario where a person is impure for 7 days, he imposes that impurity to clothing that he's touching or other utensils also for 7 days. And therefore says the Rambam, it turns out that you say the following conclusion. Adam shanaga b'meis, the Adam ba'adam acher. If a person touches a corpse and then that person touches another person, harishain tamei tumas shiva v'hasheni tumas erev. The first is impure for 7 days, the second only for 1 day. Kelim hanegim b'meis, the kelim b'kelim. If we go to the other extreme, utensils touch a corpse and then utensils touch those utensils. Shneim tmeim tumas shiva, they're both going to be impure for 7 days. Aval hashlishi, but the third degree in that case, when it's kelim, once you go past that, Bain Adam, Bain Kalim, whether it's utensils or people, Tamei Tumas Erev, they're only impure for 1 day, which is the orange. Kalim Hanoigin B'meis, V'Adam B'Kalim. If we have the utensils at the top, a person touched the utensils, V'Kalim B'Adam, and utensils touch that person, based on the special law we had, Shloshtan Tmein Tumas Shiva, all three are impure for 7 days. V'Haravi, whereas the fourth one in this scenario, the Adam or the Kalim that would touch those Kalim, Bain Adam, Bain Kalim, Tamei Tumas Erev, whether it's humans or utensils, are impure for 1 day. The Rambam doesn't mention this because this is included in the earlier principle. If an Adam touches Adam who touches Kalim, it's the same thing as an Adam who touches a Meis. And therefore they're all going to be impure for 1 day. Same thing over here. Kalim that touch the Adam, that's Tamei for 7 days, but after that, Adam or Kalim are going to be impure for 1 day. The Rambam, when he mentions this summary, is only trying to bring out the point how you have the idea of Tumas Erev introduced at 2nd degree, 3rd degree, and 4th degree. In the case of Adam and Adam, it comes in at the 2nd degree. In the case of Kalim and Kalim, it comes in at the 3rd degree. In the cases of Kalim, Adam, Kalim, it comes in at the 4th degree. It's actually how the very first Mishnah in Masechta Alos that talks about the corpse impurity, that's how it begins. It says there could be 2 levels of impurity where you become Tamei Tumas Erev, 3 levels, and 4. And then it describes this very case. 2, 3, and 4, as we just saw it on the chart. Says the Rambam Malacha, a huge exception to this whole thing. When are all of these words said, all of these 7 days and 1 days and levels of impurity, le'inyan truma v'kadashim, only with regards to being considered impure for consuming truma and consuming sacrificial meat. Aval lechayev kares al bias mikdash al achilas kadashim, but to hold you liable for excision, for entering the temple premises while impure, or eating sacrificial meat while impure, ein chayev el hashnayim bilvad. Only the first 2 degrees of removal from the corpse will become liable to kares. Harishen shenaga b'meis, the hasheni shenaga boy, the first one who touches the corpse, and the second one who touches it, kedin Torah, as the biblical statement is, shenemar, where it says in the verse, same verse we quoted before, but the beginning, v'chayil asher yiga by hatame yitma, whatever the impure person touches also becomes impure. Torah only makes clear mention of 2 degrees of removal. Somebody or something touching the corpse, and somebody or something touching that. Aval, however, if you're the 3rd degree, hanegeya bekalim shenagu ba'adam, if you touch utensils that touched a person, that touched the corpse. So these 2 are the first 2 degrees, now you're the guy over here, you're number 3. Oy hanegeya ba'adam shenaga bekalim shenagu b'meis, or your 3rd degree over here, you touched a person that touched utensils that touched the corpse. And the point is, you're no longer one of the first 2, and you enter the temple premises, Potter, Kamesha Be'arno B'ilchis Bias Mikdash. You're going to be exempt, as we explained in the laws of coming into the temple. No kares for you. Sha'advarim ha'elu, because these next degrees, Afal Pisha Hein Divrei Kabbalah, even though they're part of the oral tradition they were received from Moshe Rabbeinu, Einan Din Torah, they're not considered full biblical law. Because the only things that's explicit in the Torah is the one itself that becomes impure from the corpse, Shehu Av, which is called the father. Here the Rambam brings in this term for the first time, we're going to expand upon it soon. He's called the father of impurity. The Hasheni Hanegea by, and the second person or the second entity which touches it, Shehu Rishon, which is called a Rishon, first level, first child, so to speak. Bein Adam, Bein Kalim, whether humans or utensils. Those titles, Av and Rishon, we're coming back to in a moment. Don't forget them. Point is, In the Torah, we only have the first two. We don't have past that. So we're not going to hold you accountable for biblical excision when you're at this level and you enter the temple premises. Halacha Vav, another exception to all these rules, is klei cheres, pottery utensils. Till now we're talking about metal and other types of immersible utensils. Pottery utensils are on a different playing field. Kli cheres shenaga b'meis shehaya imay be'oil. If a pottery utensil touches a corpse or was with it in the same tent, tamei, it does become impure. However, ve'ene metame loy adam v'loy kli cheres acher v'loy shar kelim. It cannot transmit impurity. That's it. The impurity stops. It can't pass it on to a person, to other pottery utensils, or to other utensils for that matter. She'ein kli cheres nase av hatuma lo'olam. Because the property of being able to transmit impurity to people or utensils is reserved for what's called an av hatuma, a primary or a father source of impurity. Again, we're getting to it in a second. But a kli cheres can never become an av hatuma. Loi b'meis v'loi b'shar tumas, not when it comes to dead bodies, nor any other sources of impurity. And therefore, since only an av hatuma can transmit impurity to people and utensils, the kli cheres, which cannot become that, cannot transmit impurity to people or utensils. B'zed din Torah, this is a biblical law, afal pishu Kabbalah, even though it's part of the oral tradition. And now that Rambam gets to the idea of the av and the children of impurity. Zeh klal gadol betumas. This is a major rule when it comes to impurity. Kol av hatuma, anything that's classified as a father of impurity, mitame adam or mitame b'gadim b'kelim, is able to transmit its impurity to people and to clothing and to utensils, bein kli matches, bein kli shetef, bein kli cheres, whether it's metal utensils, immersible utensils, which again includes wood, bone, or glass, or pottery utensils. That's one way of stating the rule. An av can impart tuma to people and utensils. The flip side of it is, v'chala mitame adam v'kelim b'negia, anything which imparts tuma to people and utensils by touching, harei zeh av hatuma, you can be certain that it's an av. The rule works both ways. If you know something is an av hatuma, you know for sure it can pass it on to people and utensils. If you know something is passing on its tuma to people and utensils, you know that it's an av. Whereas v'chol vlad hatumas, anything that's after the av, children of impurity, further degrees, metame eichlin umashkin, can only transmit impurity to food and drink. Ve'ene metame le'adam b'kelim, but it cannot transmit impurity to people or utensils. Like kli cheres, v'lei shar kelim v'gadim, not pottery utensils nor other utensils and clothing. And here we come to the idea of the hierarchy of impurity. The Rambam doesn't talk about it clearly, but the corpse is called avi avois hatuma, the grandfather of impurity, as I mentioned before. It's the father of all fathers. One who comes into contact with the corpse is called an av hatuma, a father of impurity. And there are many other avois hatumas, other sources of impurity that are not related to corpse. Here the Rambam is talking about corpse, so he brings out this law when it comes to corpse, but it really applies to everything. And then, once you come into contact with an av hatuma, you're called, by default, you're called vlad hatuma, a child of impurity, but there are varying levels. Halacha ches says the Rambam, kol hanegea ba'av hu hanikra rishon. Anybody that touches an av is called rishon, first degree, even though really he is sometimes second degree from the impurity in the case of a corpse, but typically you're only 1 degree removed, because it begins by an av hatuma, typically only by a meis, you have avi avos. V'hanegea b'rishon nikra sheni. You touch a rishon, you become sheni, you become second degree. V'hanegea b'sheni nikra shlishi. You touch a sheni, you become a third, shlishi. V'hanegea b'shlishi nikra revi. You touch a third, you have a fourth. V'harishon v'shalemata mimenu kula nikrayin vlad hatuma. First and down are all called children of impurity. And now says that Rambam, knowing this hierarchy, we can link it to the other hierarchy of 7 days and 1 day. Halacha tes. Kol hamistame machmas hameis tumas shiva. Any entity that became impure at 7-day level impurity, bein adam, bein kelim, whether a person or utensils, hu hanikra tmei meis, is going to be called for the remaining 100 chapters or so, 140 chapters of this book, is going to be called tmei meis. Tmei meis means a person or a keli that came into direct contact with a dead body, who av me avos hatumais, it's considered to be a father of impurity, le'inyan tumas truma v'tumas kadashim kameshu b'yarnu, with regards to being impure and not being able to consume truma or sacrificial meat, as we explained. It's called an av for all properties. An av in terms of counting after it first and second. And for this rule that it can impurify people and utensils when it touches, like any other father of impurity, but not through carrying. Carrying is unique to the corpse. These lower levels must touch the next degree in order to transmit their impurity. Point is, all these red boxes that are tummy for 7 days are also an av. Halacha Yud, Kol hamistame machmas hameis tumas erev, hu vlada tuma. Any entity or person which becomes impure by virtue of a corpse only for one day is called a vlada tuma, for hu harishan tuma, first degree impurity. Ve'efsher, and now taking into account everything we've learned, it's very possible, sheyiyah harevi min hameis rishan tuma. You can be fourth removed from a corpse, but still be first degree impurity. As we explained, at least the Inyan Truma V'Kadashim with regards to not eating Truma and sacrificial meat. This is a prime example right here. First removed is the Kalim. Touched a person. Touched Kalim. All these are all an Av. Only when you get to here, and it becomes Tameh for one day, are you a Vlad. Rishon L'Tuma. So Rishon L'Tuma does not mean necessarily your degree of distance from the impurity. It simply means your biblical or halachic status with regards to transmitting impurity further. You're first in that you can make a second, etc., etc. Halacha Yud Aleph, Adam ay Kelim. Also a general rule which puts some things here into perspective. People or utensils shenitmu b'maga eretz ha'amim o b'sapras oy b'mason, who became impure by one of the rabbinic elements of a corpse or corpse-related impurity. They touched or they carried earth from outside of Israel or from a Beis HaPras, which is the field in which you plowed over a grave and now you don't know where the bones are. Or you touched what's called the soaking blood. That's the blood that collects just as the corpse is ending his life and beginning death. There's a quarter of a log of blood. The rabbis imposed tumah there. V'goylel v'doifek, or the makeshift covers and supports for a grave. Or he came into the same room as any one of these things. Or by carrying the soaking blood. And all of these and all similar to these are avos tumas shel divrei sofrim. They're called an avatuma. They're the highest level. They're a father of impurity, but only rabbinically. Clothing and utensils which will become impure from them for 7 days as well. Kulan avos hatume shel divrei sofrim. They're only rabbinic avos hatume. So it's good to keep track. You have to always know what's rabbinic, what's biblical. Different levels of impurity have different levels of consequences. Halacha Yud Beis says the Rambam, another general rule as it relates to the entities that are getting impure from a corpse, and that is in relationship to oyel, the tent. We keep talking about something forms a tent over a corpse, or a person and a corpse are under the same tent. Besides for the person becoming impure, says the Rambam, ha'oyel atzmai, hamayil alatuma, the tent itself, which is forming the tent over the source of impurity, afal pisha lenaga baytuma, even though it never touched directly the source of impurity, it's impure for 7 days, biblically, just like clothing that touched a dead body. Shanamar, because it says in the verse which describes the purification process from corpse impurity, it says, V'hiza ala oyel. They had to sprinkle the ashes of the red heifer also on the tent. That means the tent itself became impure. But Medvarim Amurim, says the Rambam, when do we say this? Only in certain types of tents, certain types of coverings. B'shehaya ha'oyel, beged oy sak, oy kli'etz oy oir. If the tent was made up of clothing, sackcloth, a wooden utensil, not a flat wooden board, it had some kind of receptacle, or leather, hide. Echad er behema v'chaya, whether it's hide from a domesticated animal, undomesticated animal, bein amutarim la'achila, bein asurim la'achila, kosher, non-kosher animals, it doesn't make a difference. But it has to be one of these materials. Shenemar, because it says, actually, funny enough, by the Mishkan, by Yifres es ha'oyel ala Mishkan, Moshe Rabbeinu spread the tent covering over the Mishkan. Ein karei oyel ela arug v'oyer ka Mishkan. We only call an oyel that which is woven or hide, like by the Mishkan. What was in the coverings? Woven materials and some skins, ram skins, tachash skins. But those materials only classify as an oyel. But if the oyel was made out of wooden boards, not receptacles, flat boards, could get not ticker like a classic roof, or a mat, something like that, or bone or metal, then it's actually pure. The tent itself becomes pure. It does serve to bring the tumah across everything under it, but it itself remains pure. Needless to say, if it's actual building, it's pure. And therefore, by the way, the Rambam clarifies a very important point. Wherever we say the words, the house is impure, and we actually had it yesterday a little bit. The house is pure, the house is impure. It doesn't mean the house itself. It's only a reference. It means the people and the utensils in the home. Because the roof or the structure itself does not become impure. In general, anything which comes from the tree cannot become impure with the impurity of tent, only linen. Otherwise, it's just eitz. And eitz, unless it's a keli, unless it's a receptacle, by default is not impure. Halacha Yud Gimel, begadim hanoigin b'meis, clothing which touch a dead body, afal pishehin kemesh latamei achedim shenagu bohen tumas shiva, even though we said before that the kelim that touch the corpse are just like the corpse itself. With regards to transmitting impurity to others who touch them, einan kemesh latamei ba'oyel uvamasa, it's only for touch, not for carrying, not for tent. Because the whole idea of carrying for a corpse itself is only derived, not explicit in the Torah, so we can't apply that to utensils. With Tumas oyel oimer, with tent, it also says Adam ki yamus be'oyel. Where's the verse here? Don't have it. Adam ki yamus be'oyel, when a person dies in a tent, which means only a person and not utensils. Lefikach, therefore, if somebody only carries utensils that had touched a dead body but he didn't touch them directly, or he forms a tent over them, or they tent over him, or he and them are in the same room, he's actually pure. So too, if a person becomes impure from a dead body, he's the tmei meis, and he forms a tent over utensils, and they're pure, something which becomes impure from a corpse can only transmit impurity through touch, not through any of the other ways. That's reserved for the corpse itself. Halacha Yudalid, another special law for the corpse, this way actually a lenient special law. Meis, a dead body, does not transmit impurity to all things that it lies on or it sits on under it, nor to all things that are layered above it. There's a whole section of laws afterwards, later in this book, called Mitame Mishkav U'Meishav. There are certain sources of impurity which Torah says that if they're lying or sitting on top of something, whatever is under them, the tumah goes all the way down. And whatever is above them, the tumah goes all the way above. That's called Mishkav U'Meishav, lying and sitting, and also Madaf, which means on top. But when it comes to a corpse, it works simply by degrees of distance. Rather, it doesn't matter if the utensil touches it from the side, where it was under it or was on top of it. All the rules are always followed in the same exact way, which means if you're directly touching the corpse, you become fully impure. Next level, we follow the hierarchy. Right? We go here. First kalim are this, second kalim are that, third kalim are this. As you get further from the corpse, you get lesser and lesser levels of impurity, as the Rambam describes. Ketza, what does this look like? You have 10 pieces of clothing, one on top of the other, and the corpse is lying on top of them. Okay, so we don't have it over here, but imagine 10 pieces of clothing, corpse on top. 10 more clothing on top of the corpse. So the clothing that's directly touching him, under and over. And the second clothing on both sides, which touch the clothing that touched it. Both of those are impure by 7 days, based on this hierarchy. First 2 kelim, tamir for 7 days. But the third one, the third one is impure only for the day, whether you're on top or below. But the fourth and afterwards, on top or on bottom, and they're all pure. Which we don't say this rule when it comes to people that are impure and do impart impurity to the things that they lie on and they sit on, as we'll explain in its place in the whole section of laws over there. If they had 10 pieces of clothing, it goes all the way down and it goes all the way up. With one major caveat. And this we're going to explore in great detail in chapter 7 and also later, but the Rambam just throws it in now just to make his point fully clear. But Medvarem says the Rambam, when do we say that all clothes or utensils above and below him are pure after you reach the 4th degree? If there was no tumar tzutza, this is a very important concept. Tumar tzutza means cramped tumah. I'm just going to say to you in short now, just to introduce the concept, but again, in chapter 7, we're going to have it at length, and also later. There is a concept of the tumah of a mace spreading. But that's only true if after the corpse, there's a space of a tefach, of a handbreadth, about 3 to 4 inches. There has to be some breathing space, so to speak, for the impurity. If it's tumar tzutza, if it's cramped, the first thing covering the corpse is less than a handbreadth away from it, then actually the tumah does penetrate all the way up and all the way down. Therefore, the Rambam is saying there cannot be tumar tzutza over here. So actually, this picture wouldn't be so accurate. Because over here, the first piece of clothing is directly on the corpse. There's no breathing space for the tumah. Therefore, the tumah does go all the way through. Also, v'lei tumas oyel. There can be no impurity of a tent. This has to be in the middle of a room. the middle of nowhere. Because if it's under a roof, then the clothing are going to become impure from the corpse for another reason. They're under the same roof as a corpse. Or there has to be at least a stone between the clothing and the between the clothing and the corpse, even if there's no breathing space. As will be explained in the appropriate place later on in this set of laws. But as long as those conditions are met, the point is that the corpse doesn't have this mishkav v'moishav or madav power. It only transmits impurity by varying degrees. As you get further away from it, you get less and less impure.